Hello, I'm Julie Levitt Learson from Fairfield University, and I have another lecture. This time we're focusing on fashions in the decades after World War II. I call this From the New Look to Camelot, 1947 to 1963. Just a reminder that the previous years of the Depression and then World War II were challenging times for fashion because people had less money to spend and much more pressing concerns. We also had to deal with rationing of materials and supply chain issues. This image is from a clothing ration guideline for the US, from the US War Production Board from about 1945. And it's telling you how many yards of fabric you can have as the maximum for different items like suits, dresses, skirts, etc. And during the war, Paris suffered in particular. The couture houses had mostly closed during Nazi occupation. Chanel, for example, shut her couture house down in 1939, which meant some 4,000 people lost their jobs just at a time when income was important. This, of course, also gave her more time to spy for and collaborate with Nazis. Other designers like Lelong kept his doors open in the name of keeping job security for his workers, but this meant that most of their clientele were Nazis, so it posed a dilemma. And even though VE Day happened in 1945, austerity and rationing and survival continued to dampen demand well after. But this had an abrupt change in 1947 because designer Christian Dior, he had worked for Lelong and some other designers previous too, but then he opened his own house in 1946 and then launched his new collection that kind of blew people's minds. So I want to dive into that for a little bit. This is one of the outfits in his spring 1947 collection, which was immediately dubbed the new look from fashion journalists. And this is very much a quintessential Dior style here. So let's take a closer look at what's going on, right? This is a suit, a jacket, and a skirt. The jacket has a peplum, right, which means it extends beyond the waist. It features rounded bosom, rounded shoulders, rounded padded out hips, and a real severely cinched in waist. They call this the wasp waist. It's a tailored jacket, and the skirt is very, very full and very pleated. Um, the skirt is also long. It's about 12 inches above the floor and very, very full. It takes yards and yards and yards of fabric to make up that pleating, and it's going to require underskirts to hold that fullness out. So it's kind of a throwback to a generation or two before with that hourglass shape and some serious understructure there. And definitely, a big swing away from those austere, very limited amounts of fabric looks from the war period. Here's another outfit from Dior. This one's called La Coquette, the Flirt from his 1948 collection. And it's a skirt with a flat front, but you can see how it's tucked up in the back, revealing an underskirt. So, kind of calling back the idea of the bustles from the late 1800s. Um, and then you can see in the image on the right another peplum jacket with a pencil skirt, but the skirt is long. The jacket is cinched in at the waist. And we have this kind of décolletage, the bosom a little bit exposed, so we can show off some of that jewelry. And these are two different evening gowns. The one on the left, the Juno dress from 1949. The one on the right, the Eugenie dress from 1948. They both have a structured bodice, a very narrow waist, and then very, very, very full, very, very, very long skirts. The Juno gown is a reference to the Greek goddess Hera or Juno, queen of the gods. And the rhinestone encrusted petals of her skirt are kind of referencing peacock feathers, which were birds associated with Hera. Eugenie is a reference to the Empress Eugenie from the mid 19th century. And the organza flounces on this. It's really a light petal pink color on this skirt, rumored to take up to 80 yards of fabric to make these happen. So, again, kind of a callback to the 19th century, but not quite all the way back. We are still very firmly in the 20th century, but recalling past ages. Again, luxurious, extravagant, um, detailed, and high quality materials, expert craftsmanship. People went nuts for these, and he had a hard time keeping everything in stock. And he used to be like, "Ladies, please, you can only have one dress. I can't make. You don't need three of them." But I think people were just kind of ready for this change. So Dior kind of reigned supreme over Parisian couture for about 10 years. Then he died very suddenly in 1957. This image here is of models wearing his last collection. You can see some evening dresses, but also day dresses and suits and coats. They've all got that tailored, kind of throwback, extravagant, luxurious look that we've been seeing. But Dior certainly wasn't the only designer of note in this era. So, in the next few slides, I'm going to show you a few other designers working at the same time. I think it's important to note that after the war, Coco Chanel took a hiatus in Switzerland until 1954, largely to escape persecution, you would call it, or prosecution for her Nazi activities. First up, we have Cristobal de Balenciaga, Spanish designer working in Paris couture houses like Dior before starting his own house. Dior was a big admirer of Balenciaga, referred to him as the master of us all. And Balenciaga liked to play around with silhouette shapes. In contrast to Dior's new look, hopefully you can see some of that here with these dresses. But even contrasting is kind of a reaction to Dior. And maybe you look at these and think like that tulip dress seems kind of effortless, or that balloon jacket is kind of effortless, just kind of like a thrown on massive fabric, right? But these seemingly effortless shapes are supported by some really complicated understructure. And some of his designs are referring back to historic Spanish styles. Maybe you can see them, like the Baroque Infanta style, or certainly like flamenco dresses you can see in that middle image. Another designer is Charles James of Anglo-American extraction, known as America's first couturier. Similarly to Dior, James was using rigid understructures to create his statement silhouettes. For example, the cloverleaf dress from 1953 on the right has two underskirts using steel wire, stiff fabric, and fabric tape to hold that shape out. And like Dior, he was also fond of extravagance. That butterfly dress on the left from 1955 has 25 yards of tulle to make that kind of bustle shape in the back and weighed 18 pounds. Turning to Hubert de Givenchy, French couturier, he had been an apprentice of Balenciaga and kind of experimented with Balenciaga's signature shapes. You can kind of see that passing down of the idea in that sack dress on the right from 1959. And he was also fond of like the baby doll dress. Um, he worked with Audrey Hepburn on Breakfast at Tiffany's and also designed collections. And if you look at this blouse on the left, the Bettina blouse, you can see that he's using menswear fabrics like cotton shirting, but combining it with feminine embroidery to make couture designs for women. Then we have Oleg Cassini, who's Italian and Russian. Just like Givenchy, he also designed for some style icons, including Grace Kelly, Marilyn Monroe, and Jackie Kennedy. He was very well known for his feminine style, using soft, romantic fabrics and some flirty details. You can see these are all satin and taffeta. Again, going back to that kind of classic, tight fitting torso with then lots of detail on the skirt, like that Marilyn Monroe kind of mermaid dress. Look at all of the gathered satin or taffeta on the Grace Kelly dress on the left, again with that long kind of training skirt in the back. And then in the center, I believe this is the Jackie Kennedy dress with that little satin flower on the waist. I also want to draw your attention to Anne Lowe. She was an American designer who really was kind of an unsung genius, who's only very recently gotten some of the attention she deserves. She's a woman of color, a daughter and a granddaughter of seamstresses, whose family had been enslaved and then was making her career as a dressmaker. She was most known for making kind of debutante wear for young ladies kind of coming out into society, and also evening and bridal couture in New York City. And she was kind of like a well-kept secret. Like women loved her work and would refer her to their friends and family members, but they kind of kept her a secret. Her work, if you can see these various images, features elaborate hand-sewn embellishments and embroidery. She was most famous for making Jackie Kennedy's wedding gown, which you can see in the bottom left, and you can see all of those tucks and the embroidery and applique work in the skirt there. Again, just like some of the other designers we've been looking at, we're kind of embracing the 19th century feminine, big shaped dresses and fancy fabrics and all that kind of stuff. Erin Lowe, I think it's important to point out, she was frequently underpaid or otherwise disrespected for her work, and was not as famous in her lifetime as she probably deserved to be. In the mid 1950s, Coco Chanel has returned from hiding out in Switzerland to escape responsibility for her actions in World War II, and she's come back and reopened her house and staged a comeback in Paris. It's important to note Coco Chanel was born in 1883, I believe. So she is well into her 70s at this point, but she's got another couple of tricks up her sleeve. So this second act, or maybe her third act, carried on much of her original style. If you think back to like the 1920s when we were looking at her work before, right? It's like these impeccably cut, boxy suits, bold accessories and color contrasts, and playful little details. So you can see a couple of suits here, and of course, an evening gown. Her jacket shape then was kind of an alternative to that corseted wasp waist style of Dior and so many of his imitators. And then you can see on the right there, that's Jackie Kennedy in 1963 wearing a pink Chanel suit. So, what drove this shift in fashion? Let's spend the next few slides talking about some of the factors in play here. Well, first, we have a post war economic boom and a new sense of optimism. Europe was definitely economically depressed after the war, but the Marshall Plan helped to rebuild most of Europe. And America came through the war economically relatively unscathed. And so after the decade of depression and then the decade of war, um, America and Europe was definitely ready for good times. And while not everybody was able to partake of this new prosperity equally, for many, this was a time with some extra money and some extra breathing room. Now, a new appetite for consumerism is also driving things. Now, as you can see in the previous slides, right, we've been talking a lot about couture designers, but this was also a great era for fashion magazines and fashion photography. So magazines like Vogue, Harper's Bazaar became very influential ways to show designers' work. And fashion photographers like Sir Cecil Beaton, Irving Penn, Richard Avedon, and Edward Steichen, among others, became well known for their photography as well as for the people and the designers whose work they were photographing. We also have Hollywood and political celebrities. Example, Queen Elizabeth II's coronation was in 1952. President Kennedy's election was in 1960. And they influenced middle class taste. We also have mass production. Factories were booming after the war, and they provided good quality and stylish clothing for the middle class. There was a booming business in copying couture designs to make them available to those who couldn't afford to go to Dior's house in Paris and have a one of a kind gown made for them. And catalogs, department stores, even home sewers could buy copied couture styles. Another way that these fashions were made accessible to the middle and working classes is through new textiles and so-called wonder fibers. Now, the couture houses, right, the very high-end places are going to be using luxury textiles like silk and lace and hand embroidery and all that stuff. But synthetic fibers, polyester, nylon, and a whole host of others were being produced in factories and were joining the natural textiles for dressmaking. And these kind of wonder fibers were definitely cheaper to turn into garments than, you know, double-faced satins made of silk and those kinds of things. Many of these synthetic fibers were developed in the service of the military for war use. And then after the war, we had the technology, so let's find a new use for them. Let's turn them into civilian clothing. So things like rayon, which was an artificial silk produced using wood pulp and a lot of chemistry, things like rubber and elastic, nylon, and then lots of range fabrics that called things like Orlon or Banlon or other kinds of things. The middle class was also finding itself with more leisure time, and that allowed people to engage in hobbies and sports and clubs and social events and vacationing. For women, too, the post war boom led to a lot of innovation in domestic products like kitchen appliances and vacuums and irons and things like that, that supposedly made housework easier and made caring for clothing easier. One of the selling points of the Wonder Fibers was that they would be easier to clean because things like silk you couldn't throw in a washing machine and a dryer, right? But polyester you could. And so you could have more items of clothing because you could take care of them easily in the home. So let's take another closer look at the 1950s silhouettes for women. We'll look at day wear, evening wear, and casual wear. So there are two basic silhouettes for day wear for women in the 1950s. On the left, we can see a pencil shape, which is very slim and vertical. On the right, we have the shape that's more of an hourglass, referred to as the petticoat revival, where we've got a form-fitting bodice but a very, very full skirt. Both of these looks have a nipped in waist with lots of understructure from the bosom to the hips that are making that hourglass illusion be prominent. And the mid calf skirt length is pretty popular. Look two, women's haircut is pretty short, exposing the neck and the shoulders. Their hair is often curled, so we need rollers, hairspray, or a permanent wave to help make this look happen. And women often have shoes to match the outfit. A woman's outfit is still not complete without gloves, hat, and a handbag. And it's a pretty overt makeup era. It's pretty heavy. We've got dark eyes, black mascara, really thin arched brows, and bold red lips and nails. Here are some of examples of that underwear that is creating that structure. Again, using these wonder fabrics and industrial materials. We have wired brassieres, nylons now to replace silk for our stockings. And then some structures that are kind of looking a little bit like corsets from the previous century. We have something called a bullet bra that's making a really prominent kind of cone shape to the bosom. It's a bit different from the Victorian shapes, but it's that same idea, deliberately artificial. And then if you look at like the corselet or the Merry Widow, again, creating that wasp waist and then extending down over the hips, creating structure for the bosom, the waist, and the hips. In the center, you can also see a flounced petticoat that's going to be made with stiff, light fabric. Could be silk taffeta, could be organdy or nylon or some other wonder fabric, but as you see, lots of volume, lots of ruffles. Some day dresses and suits here. This would be suitable attire for office wear if you worked in an office, like the characters in Mad Men or other white collar work. Also good for visiting, doing social errands, or volunteer work, like PTA stuff. Day dresses are often in cotton or polyester. Suits Could be wool or polyester or a blend of both. You can see lots of color, pattern, texture, and accents, belts, contrasting buttons, big noticeable buckles, those kinds of things. But the hats are pretty small and kind of neat, just like they were in the 20s when you've got short hair, that kind of close to the head hat kind of goes along with it. Another popular item for casual wear is an Angora sweater. Angora is the fur from a rabbit. And it was very, very soft and very, very fluffy. Of course, there were lots of sweaters from other fabrics as well. But in this period, they were often very tight fitting, really accentuating the curves and or the points of the body. And they were sometimes embellished with beading or embroidery or held in place with clips. And sometimes you had kind of twin sets, right? The pullover sweater with a little cardigan to go with it. Another iconic garment of this decade is the poodle skirt. This was an invention of Julie Lynn Charlotte around Christmas of 1947. She was trying to make an affordable holiday outfit that kind of mimicked Christian Dior's new look style, but she couldn't afford the couture price tag. And so she made this circle skirt out of an inexpensive fabric. These would often be made out of felt, if you can imagine, but lots of different materials as well. And she had these kind of Christmas tree appliques that she stitched onto it and added a ruffle at the bottom. And voila, a trend is born. So as you can see, the poodle skirt doesn't always have to feature a poodle. I love the cocktail, the Eiffel Tower there, and then you can just see some skirts there that just have kind of a geometric trim pattern going around them. But these were very, very popular. And of course, you needed to have a petticoat underneath it to hold that fullness out. If we want to be real casual, we can wear some play clothes. As I had said in the last lecture, it has become socially acceptable for women to wear pants without causing a scandal. So, pants, jeans, or dungarees for gardening and other, sporting activities, or capri pants, sometimes called pedal pushers. Those are shorter, between the knee and the ankle, and they kind of come in a variety of lengths. And still be called that. You can see the lady on the left, kind of mid calf, and then the ladies in the upper center, a little bit below the knee. And of course, you could wear shorts as well. All of these acceptable garments for outdoor fun, doing chores, and casual socializing, like barbecues in your neighborhood. And beachwear, very popular. One-piece bathing suits, two-piece bathing suits start to come into vogue here. Um, We'll eventually see the bikini named after an island in the Pacific. And these bathing suits are often worn with coordinating cover ups like sundresses or shirts, or skirts that wrap around like a sarong, or wrap around like a poodle skirt. And then you can see this trend happening for men as well. They have their short bathing suit bottoms and then paired with a matching or coordinating shirt. And now let's look at the evening silhouette. Just like we've seen in past eras, bare neck, bare shoulders, showing off more of the chest. Here in this era, we liked a deep décolletage. Still want that nipped in waist. And you tended to see floor length or shin length hems. That shin length was often referred to as tea length, so kind of that late afternoon style. Popular colors were often, solid colors and shiny taffeta, where you could see some contrasting. You can see some tulle or organdy or organza as well, and often paired with some pretty ostentatious costume jewelry. But we also have in this era the cocktail dress. This is a less formal look than a floor-length gown, and went very well with after work things like the cocktail hour that happens at 5 o'clock when we get out of work. So these are great for like dinner parties, for date night, and for less formal evening events. And they, again, come in kind of two silhouettes, the body conscious one, um, much more narrow and close to the body, or a fuller skirt. Sometimes that form-fitting shape of a cocktail dress was referred to as a wiggle dress. All right, we've paid a lot of attention to women, but let's look at the 50 silhouettes for men. Day wear for men, if you work in an office or a business, is going to be a suit. This is often single or double breasted. We still have vests, but they're becoming less popular in this era than from earlier times. And we're kind of shrinking back away from that really broad shouldered, narrow waist, padded shoulder, wide lapel with the sharp peaks from the 1940s. This is a little bit softer, a little bit more rounded, a little smaller lapel, kind of boxy, and full legs to these pants. There's kind of a not quite slouchiness to them, but a more relaxed silhouette here. Um, Pants are going to be double pleated. So lots of fabric in there and a high waistline. It's going to come in kind of under the ribs. And popular colors are what we kind of refer to now as dad colors, earth tones, ochres, greens, browns, charcoal grays. Maybe if you want to be flashy, a little bit of pink. You're always going to have a tie. The tie is often going to be colorful, patterned, maybe a little bit whimsical. And if you're out and about, you're going to have a hat. The kind of iconic look for this era is the so-called man in the gray flannel suit. But by the early 1960s, the silhouette is changing a little bit into a longer, leaner, more vertical look. This is in conjunction with John F. Kennedy taking over the White House and being kind of known as Camelot. It's a younger, more athletic style for menswear. And so single-breasted is definitely more popular than double-breasted with a really narrow lapel, narrow shoulders, almost pinched. And instead of those pleated trousers, we've got flat front trousers with a more narrow and tapered leg. The Kennedy mystique was all about, you know, playing baseball with the family or throwing a frisbee or sailing and doing these very leisurely outdoorsy activities. And so the suits are kind of reflecting that sporty Ivy League kind of idea as well. Evening wear, still, if we're doing something formal, it's going to be a tuxedo. The tuxedo has pretty much supplanted the tailcoat as a general rule. White tie is still a thing for very, very formal occasions, but we require that level of formality less and less often, especially in the US. Europe is going to remain a bit more formal, but US is definitely embracing casual living. So black tie is typically the most formal you're going to get. Jacket shape of these tuxedos is going to follow those day wear suit trends, but we do see this shawl collar, which you can see in these images here, right? So instead of a peak or a triangle up near the shoulder, it's a rounded lapel that becomes wider at the bottom where it reaches the button at the waist. And then another shift is kind of white or off-white jackets gain popularity here. And just as vests are disappearing a little bit from day wear, waistcoats are disappearing a little bit from evening wear, and they're being replaced with a cummerbund. A cummerbund, if you've ever been to prom, right, that's that kind of pleated satiny belt thing with the pleats facing up. People call them crumb catchers. It is derived from sashes worn by people in India that was adopted by the British Raj, and it made its way into formal wear. Also, you can see the bow ties being very popular as opposed to an ascot or full length tie for evening wear. They tend to be very small, very neat, and often provide a contrasting color or pattern. For casual wear, sweaters, very popular for men's wear as well as women's wear. You can have a vest or a cardigan. Often these sweaters are going to be collarless. They're going to have interesting contrasting colors, like you can see in that image on the right, or they might have some interesting kind of cable knitting or details in the knitting to have some accents. Also, for casual wear, separates. You might wear a jacket and pants, but they might not match. So it's not really a suit, right? It's separate pieces coming together to make an outfit. And so we start to call that jacket a sports coat, and the pants are slacks. So they coordinate, but they're not made of the same fabric. For casual wear, you don't need a necktie, although you might want to wear one. That's fine, depending on how casual you're feeling. As you can see in that center photo, as I was saying with the suits in the 1950s, pants are double pleated. So they're nice and roomy and they have a high waist and a little bit of a tapered leg. Other casual wear would include short sleeve shirts. These could be cotton or they could be of some of this wonder fabric. Gonna often be in bright colors or kind of catchy patterns like checks or stripes or plaids. Check out the bowling shirt. This is a shirt you'd wear specifically for that bowling activity. And you might wear the same style shirt as all of your friends on a team. So, kind of that sportswear from the Victorian age carrying over. Another popular item for men's casual wear is the Hawaiian shirt. Harry S. Truman, he had an extensive collection of Hawaiian shirts and loved to wear them to play golf and those kinds of things. Another reason why I think the Hawaiian shirt was so popular is that servicemen who were stationed in the Pacific during World War II brought them home as souvenirs. And of course, we have Elvis, who did several movies that were set in Hawaii and sported himself many a striking Hawaiian shirt, and that spread the trend further. Hawaiian shirts are known for their bright colors, a variety of patterns with tropical imagery. And you could pair this with Bermuda shorts, which are kind of long shorts, and knee socks, or with long pants, like on the image on the left. Lastly, I kind of want to point out a little bit of some outsider fashion. If you remember the great masculine renunciation from the end of the French Revolution and this idea of rejecting all of that kind of old world aristocratic finery and frippery, well, that leaves a lot out. It leaves a lot of guys out of the in fashion crowd. And that kind of gray flannel suit or the Hawaiian shirt or bowling shirt leaves a lot to be desired for some groups. So here is one kind of subgenre called teddy boys or greasers. Teddy boys would be the term used most commonly in England, greasers in the US. And if you've ever seen the movie Grease, this is who we're talking about. Their kind of signature look would be a white undershirt that they would wear as a shirt, right? So, like the t shirt, that was underwear, and they're wearing it as their shirt. So, kind of rebellious. And they would pair that with denim jeans or dungarees, which would often be rolled up at the hem. And they would wear with black ankle boots and a black leather jacket. These are great for riding your motorcycle. Um, and if you look on the bottom left hand picture, those kind of elaborate front loaded hairstyles, those are called pompadours. So there's attention to the hair, it's longer and has quite a bit more product in it than your typical man's hairstyle, which is kind of banker boring. But these are guys that are taking careful care of their hairstyle, shaping it artificially and using a lot of product to hold that shape. They were often considered rebellious, maybe a little bit dangerous, and so therefore drew a lot of attention. James Dean, in his movies, kind of was a champion of this style. I'm stopping the lecture here because after 1963, the world gets a lot less optimistic, right? We have John F. Kennedy's assassination. That's going to be followed up by more assassinations of Dr. Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and Robert Kennedy, and more upheavals around the world. And fashion is going to get less vanilla. Um, there's a term we use among fashion historians called style tribes. We're looking for a better term, but this is the best one we have right now, which means fashions that are favored by a small group or community within the main society. Um, and these style tribes start to become more visible and more popular. So it's becoming harder for a single look or single set of rules to dominate fashion for men and for women and for different social classes. That is all I have for today. Thank you for your time.